Thank you very much, Lady Olga. And we will proceed with the conference, and let's get going. Hernan, you should be on. Can you start your presentation?
Definitely. Now you can see it. Thank you so much. Good day. Thank you for the introduction to Lady Olga and Kersey to this event. Really, having an event that is lasting so long is very unique in this world in which things are so fast and everything is moving at the speed of light. And your call to keep our group of professionals together working on what is relevant is very welcome and needed. For my presentation to open the day, we want to cover how we can ensure that privacy risks are properly managed in the way that we were responding to coronavirus, and now the way that we need to come back to a new normal. So this presentation is going to provide you with very practical tips on 5 processes, 5 recommendations that you can use then as a checklist to know where you are in terms of managing compliance and data protection and privacy. So, Christian, if we can move to the next slide, please. I don't know if I can do it. Christian, can you, or Kersey, can you move my slide because I cannot? Well, one of the complications that we have in practice during the coronavirus with privacy is the lack of consistency in the requirements. We were dealing with controls, requirements, standards that they were changing overnight, not only country by country, hear me now? Now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Yes, finally something happened. Well, when we were dealing with the response to coronavirus in terms of privacy, there was not any consistency in the requirements that we have from the local authorities. And it puzzled all the activities that we were managing. In the next slide, Christian, please, can you help me to move it? We were expecting to celebrate the second birthday for GDPR, but it's not really a party, or it's a party with at least two guests, unexpected, Brexit and coronavirus. Still, there are many things to celebrate in GDPR compliance. We got a global standard. We already had addressed many of the requirements with best practices. We got more certification, and still the main impact is how the community is now dealing with the requirements again. So in the next slide, Christian, please. The first recommendation for me is to review all the changes in the user access to the ERP, the customer system, and the share folders. Because of working from home, all the changes in terms of moving people from one location to the other location, because of all the people that were unable to actually perform and execute transactions in the systems, we had a huge change in the user accesses. So my advice here is to review not only the accesses that they are now available to the users, but also what happened during the response period to coronavirus. Also look for the admin rights. Be focused on the DBA views, be focused on the approval of these new accesses, cover the high-risk employees, and also cover consultants. It's very important that we get the picture about the proper accesses. And in order to focus the work, look at accesses to displays and edit the largest databases with the most critical pieces of personal data or any confidential data. Run whatever the solution that you use for segregation of duties, and then come back to the data owners, to the applications owner, and ask them the reasonability for the new accesses in the systems. It's very important that you involve them again and you recertify the rights. In the next slide, please, Christian. You will need to give new priorities to your privacy and compliance program. Now we got less power to advance with the program. Maybe we are discussing how to cut cost, and it means that you need to refocus. So look at everything that is pending and inform how these audits, these requests for access to personal data are impacted by coronavirus. We know that the regulators will understand that there is a change, that they will understand that there are a backlog of different rights to be executed. But don't forget to inform the stakeholders. This is very, very important. And also remember that you will have new contracts, new vendors that they were helping organizations with the response plans to coronavirus, using teleconferences, teleworking, more collaborative tools, and review the contracts, because in the urgency to deal with these risks, there was very little time to explain requirements, to complete proper data processing agreements, and to control these parties. In the next slide, Christian, my advice is to increase the security controls. We still have a number of people working from home, and it means that we have higher risks in terms of errors and fraud. So we were discussing a lot about phishing and fraud attacks, social engineering. My advice here is to ask IT, be sure that they are updating the VPNs and the access solutions, that they are patching everything that is related to remote connections. So I also want to recommend you to check for all the failed accesses into the systems. Look what happened. Look for denials of accesses to critical systems, and review any change in the parameters of the security solutions. So if you have a log or a data loss prevention software, being sure that you control whether these security parameters had been changed during the coronavirus situation. In the next slide, the fourth recommendation, please, Christian. I want to suggest to update the data flows, the record of processing activities. We may have new health and lifestyle data. For instance, at the beginning of the coronavirus, we were discussing who traveled to such a country or not. We may have people moving databases to other storage drives. We may have people developing end users applications in order to work from home when the systems have any performance issue. And you need to cover all these changes in the record of processing activities. Without understanding where the data is, you cannot manage the risks. So here is my recommendation to change for new data sets and copies and replication of databases that may have been populating into the system as a response of the coronavirus. If you have a data loss prevention software, being sure that all the new assets are covered. People are using all the cell phones to deal with cloud services solutions, and all these new flows are to be covered by the record of processing activities and also by the asset management software. And then, if there is a major change, being sure that you got a data privacy impact assessment. It's very important that even though it was not preventive, or maybe it was not preventive, at least once that you detected that there was a major change in the way that we were using personal data as a response of the coronavirus, now is the time to document all these changes. And the last tip, Christian, it's the, can you change the slide? Thank you. Is to cover if there is a breach in personal data. We know that all these crises and the disruption of the supply chain and the controls are a catalyst for cybercrime. So my recommendation here is that you investigate any missing asset, for any missing asset. So run the asset management solution, detect if there is an asset with critical information or personal information that had not connected to the systems in the last 1, 2, 3 weeks, and ask what happened with these assets. Sometimes they can be disconnected because we were moving from one office to the other, to other offices, for one data room to other data room because of the way that we were shutting down buildings. But maybe that asset is not controlled. It's not under the. It's not our property now, and we need to consider if there was a data breach or not. Review the security logs during the crisis, be able to understand and weird, unusual patterns of access and activities, and also request updates from data processors. What I mean is that talk to your data processors and require them to notify any risk related to personal data, any incident that they have. Is very good for corporate defense to have these confirmations. So we have a few minutes for questions. Muhammad is referring that they have customer information in the third party that is managed in the cloud. How can you make it secure? Finally, we are considering cloud as being a safe storage. How can you make sure? Okay, by getting certificates from the cloud service provider, by requesting them to attest that they are performing the DPA's requirements, plus the GDPR controls and any other privacy regulation that may be applicable. And also, it's very important that we physically locate the servers involving cloud services. There are a lot of technical challenges here. Sometimes we can negotiate with the processor better control. Sometimes the bargain power is not balanced. So there is not a single way to deal with that. I mean, if you are dealing with Microsoft, Amazon, and Google for hosting services, you can tell that they already have proper controls because you are assuming that they have larger clients. The key here, and my advice, is to focus on any small sized provider and get the confirmation for them, ask for certificates, and also audit. Why not? Go and audit the processor. Any other question? We still got 1 minute to go. Okay, it seems that we are done. Thank you so much for your attention to these 5 practical tips to deal with coronavirus during these very unusual conditions. I think that you can use these tips as a checklist Percy, I am reconnecting now. Okay, so another question that we may have. Yes, some people say that they cannot hear me, but I can see the mic working, and my connection is very reliable. Hello again. Okay, I will. Now it seems that I am back.
Okay, now you're okay. All right, go
Okay,
ahead.
good. Thank you. So, any other question? We left the last minute to address questions.
Yeah, they'll log in.
Good. You can use these tips as a checklist when you are resuming the activities back to the office. In the last days before we shut down services and offices and premises, warehouses during the coronavirus response, there was an stampede of people leaving the offices. And they took documentation, they took files, they took drives, they took laptops to work from home. And the key is that we are able now to regain control on these assets. It's very important that now we can understand that all the documentation, all the pieces of information, all the asset that left our premises now is coming back, and it was secure during the time that people were working.
I think it's due to some hardware thing issues.
Can you listen to me again?
Yeah, go ahead, and we can hear you.
Okay, good. So also control that whatever the piece of data that people took out the office was related to the shop functions. You may have different cases that
in your left corner. Okay.
So can you mute the mic, please? You will find that many pieces of data were not related to the shop functions, and you need to assess whether there was a breach or not. It's very important that you involve the managers and you find out the root causes of moving personal data or sensible data in and out the perimeter of the organization. Be sensitive with the work of the consultants, and be also focused on the work on the DBA roles. Any questions?
Yes, and let me ask you some question until we get our next speaker online. And this is in connection with the current crisis where people are working from home. And there are many departments, because normally when you are in an office environment, you can speak to the HR department, the legal department, the IT department, and so on. However, whilst we are working from home, this important component of the communication within the organization disappears. Do you have any suggestions on what we can do to maintain the communication levels so that we do not enter in a situation where some important information on the crisis or security or other issues is missing?
It's very important to send warnings, newsletters, communications from the top to the bottom, but it's more important that we measure the reception of these communications. So you can track who is opening an email. You can track who is clicking on a solution. You can track who is actually spending time in a web page. So for all this documentation, be sure that somebody is measuring the results. Somebody is measuring how many people are actually acting on the communication, and they are not just keeping the emails on the call or being hid in the conference by using, for instance, a tracking tool that for sure we have in the companies, like marketing tools to understand who and how many people are not reacting to the communication, to send a warning, to look for another channel, and sometimes even to call that person, say, have you read this in communication? Have you understand? Do you understand what it needs to be done? And also force people to talk into the different meetings and ask for feedback. It's a good way to engage people with the communication that is broken. Also, you can use a strategy to use ambassadors in the different functions. What we mean? During the responses to coronavirus, we needed to designate one person being the ambassador of compliance, risk, or privacy side by side to be our eyes in a building, in a group, in a function, in a country. So maybe you want to use one of these initiatives to have one ally, country by country, side by side, to be sure that they are supporting, that they are monitoring compliance and with the new requirements, whatever they are. This initiative, the ambassadors during the coronavirus, worked nicely in order to oil the communications and to be sure, finally, that people were reacting to the communication. The problem is not to communicate new requirements. The problem is about changing the way that people decide which is the requirement to comply and how. So that's why it's important to consider an ambassador initiative here. We also have a new question from Deepak. Shouldn't we review the processing and the transfer agreement? Well, apart from the reviewing of the user accesses, data flows, and DPAs, absolutely. If you are involving a data processor, of course that you need to cover the data processing agreements, and you need to get a confirmation for compliance. Always cover your vendors, your IT vendors, and the data processors, as they are somebody internal, subcontractors also. It doesn't matter, finally, who is paying the salary. What matters here is who is performing the controls and who is acting. on behalf of the organization. So when you have requirements, always involve the data processors as they were employees, and ask them to, and ask the data processors to share this information to the employees and subcontractors working on behalf of the organization with personal data that we own.
So thank you very much, Hernan. As usual, you have so much practical experience from the many jobs that you have had in your career, as well as the academic component. So we get information on how to, the practical information on how to from various angles. Now we will we will continue with our next speaker, a lawyer from Italy, Lorenza Villa. There was an issue with her microphone when we tried to make a review just before. So we will start with Lorenza and see if it functions. Should it not function properly, then we will go over to the next speaker, which is Lady Olga and Gareth.